All right. Hello, everybody. We are live.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Hey, good to see you, Patrick.
Man, that 30-second countdown always gets me amped up.
I know, I'm all jacked. I'm like, let's go.
It's the best. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for jumping on today.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just all these little tricks and details associated with engaging with consultants and working with contract engineers that people just don't seem to clue into until they've gotten burned a couple of times. And having been on both sides of it, it's really exciting and a lot of fun to be able to share some of those tips and tricks with our audience to help them make sure that they get the best experiences when they're outsourcing things.
Yeah, and I'm excited to talk to you a lot actually today about outsourcing, about consulting, as well as about electrical engineering. And I guess before we get started, Daniel, can you intro the series a little bit, and then we'll introduce you, Patrick, and go from there.
Yeah, sounds good.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's awesome to be here on I think it's the third Ioterra Live Office Hours with Dr. Patrick Marcus, the founder of Marcus Engineering. As live office hours would imply, we're streaming this live to all the social media accounts we know of, or at least LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Right. So for anyone who's watching on those, hello. For anyone who's watching on TikTok, we're sorry we haven't enabled this for you yet. So hopefully soon. This is meant to be a sort of live event where we can engage with the brain and the experience of Patrick. So Danny and I will be chatting with him, but we really encourage everyone who's tuning in to leave comments in the thread. You can post directly on the YouTube feed, directly on the LinkedIn feed. We'll see it here and we'll get those questions answered. This is going to be a fun one today. Marcus Engineering is headquartered down in Arizona. And so we're going to chat with Patrick just a little bit about his background and the history of the company. Then we'll learn a little bit about some of the engineering and product development tips he has. And then we'll really delve in deep on, if you're a company building a product, what are the right ways to engage a consultant and do it correctly?
And like Daniel mentioned, you can leave a comment in the Facebook stream, LinkedIn feed, or YouTube feed, and we'll be able to address your comment. Or you can DM me, direct message me on LinkedIn or any of those platforms, and I will. I can invite you up on screen as well to ask a question.
Cool. Yeah. So Danny, go ahead and introduce our esteemed speaker.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and change the view here so that we can focus. Yeah. And so thank you very much. This is Dr. Patrick Marcus. You have a degree in, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm often wrong, but you have a degree from the University of Arizona in biomedical engineering, or your PhD is in biomedical engineering.
Correct.
You also
biomedical engineering, great sport. I love it.
Yeah, right.
Daniel actually also is a biomedical engineer.
Yeah, I didn't make it all the way to the end of the the race, so to speak, of educational certificates.
Yeah, so I've got my BS in electrical engineering and my doctorate. My BS in electrical engineering and my PhD in biomedical engineering. But not a lot of people know that I've also been through the McGuire Entrepreneurship Program at the University of Arizona in the prestigious Eller College of Management. And it was actually a top 10 entrepreneurship program in the country. Awesome. When I went through it. And I've also, in the last couple of years, kind of brushed up at Babson College, which is also actually #1 in entrepreneurship, through some executive entrepreneurial training programs. So I've been lucky enough to have not only a lot of good technical experience and background, but I also know quite a bit about business and due diligence and how to build companies.
Yeah, and we've seen you at tons of events over the years, actually, in our previous history. But we've seen you at all kinds of entrepreneurial events as well.
Yeah, usually in the middle of a cheering crowd, if my memory is right.
Yeah. And at almost every other year, Microchip Masters. I know you're a staple there. And yeah, so let's jump a little bit into what happened after school. I know you kind of went back and kind of brushed up, as you just mentioned. on the business side of things, but you became an electrical engineering consultant. How right away at Applied Process Tech?
So yeah, let me kind of fill in that story. So while I was in graduate school, I hated graduate school. It was just awful. I wanted to build cool new things, and a lot of graduate school was about reviewing all the research that other people had done and patting them on the back and then making some kind of incremental improvement. But I wanted to go and build robotic arms and brain machine interfaces. So I didn't enjoy the pace very much. So I started doing some part-time engineering consulting for this company, Applied Process Technologies. And then fast forward to getting done with graduate school and that entrepreneurship program, we had grown Applied Process Technologies into a new company called General Plasma, and we helped grow that. I helped grow that from an 8-person company to about 100 people over the course of about 4 years. And we went from about $500,000 worth of revenue to $60 million a year in revenue at our peak around 2006, 2007. And then the economy crashed and things kind of went up and down. But after I finished graduate school, I went and worked there for about 5 years. And so around the 2010, 2011 timeframe, as often happens, I wasn't seeing eye to eye with the original founder. And I'm like, you know what? If we keep running this company like engineers run companies, we're never going to get rich. This equity is never going to be worth anything. We need to be bright, technical engineering people, but also think like business people, because business people know how to run companies. And I just couldn't get him to do it. So finally, I went in and I'm just like, you know what? We're disagreeing a lot. We're not getting along. I think I've got a solution. He's like, oh, this is great. Tell me what your solution is. I'm like, I'm going to resign. He's like, what? You're just going to leave all this equity on the table? I'm like, man, it's just not going to be worth anything if we keep doing stuff this way. We need more help. We need more business people. And anyway, so I resigned in 2011 and spun up Marcus Engineering. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to be a solo consultant. I'm just going to get going on this stuff. And because I was thinking like a business person and thinking about marketing and sales and making sure that my products had my engineering services had a market, I started picking up business pretty quickly. And then I hired an intern to help me build cables and circuit boards. And I hired a contractor to help me write software. And very quickly, my wife at the time, she kind of comes into my home office and she's like, honey, you know, I love you. This is great. But would you stop having weird people over to the house every day? This is just weird. And so I went and I got an office. And around that time, a guy who was moving to Tucson said, hey, you look like you got a really cool company. I'd love to come and work with you. And I'm looking for a full-time job. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. You're bright. And I woke up the next day in a cold sweat. Oh my God, I'm a business owner. This is real. I've got mouths to feed now. And it's really just grown slowly ever since. I got that first office, 1,200 square feet in 2012. And then in 2016, we moved into our custom-built 5,000 square foot offices and development labs that we're sitting in today. And it's just been a wild ride. We actually did really well during COVID. We've got a great reputation, a great customer base, and we're having a good time with a lot of smart people doing new stuff every day.
Amazing. And that's an amazing just story, you know, how it got started right from your garage.
Right,
Just
right,
like,
literally.
Check this out too. I can do this. Well, bam, there's Marcus Engineering right there.
Woo-hoo. Everyone, check.
What's the
That's right.
team?
Look at that.
What's the team look like today, Patrick, at Marcus Engineering?
Yeah, so we're still a pretty small team. From a company standpoint, it's small, but from an engineering team standpoint, it's pretty substantial. We've got 6 electrical and computer engineers working for us, an operations manager, a part-time bookkeeper, and myself doing what I call all of the crap work that the technical people aren't going to do and don't want to do. And that's the team, a little bit under 10 people.
That's the joy of being the business owner, Patrick.
Yeah, isn't it? I get to do stuff like this instead of working.
And
Awesome.
most of those team members in Tucson?
They are all in Tucson, actually. We don't have any remote workers right now.
Okay, well, I think I'd like to actually go ahead and just kind of jump right in from here and talk a little bit of engineering, and then I really would love to hit on some of that business expertise that you mentioned as well, and get to how companies can win when deciding to work with consultants. But let's start with some of the engineering side of things, and with your team of electrical and embedded firmware engineers, where do you guys primarily focus? On the microcontroller, microprocessor type of side of things?
Well, that's a great question. First and foremost, over the years, we really gravitated towards what I'll call the high end of electronics and software products. So we work primarily in heavily regulated industries. So by that, I mean medical device, military, aerospace, mining, safety critical consumer, functional safety type products. Has to work. It can't lock up. Calling tech support and saying, hey, what do I do? Oh, just unplug it and plug it back in again. You can't do that because it can cost lives and cost damage to people and equipment. So it's led us down this path of being really process oriented, really diligent and strict about requirements, definitions, and test and verification plans and things. But as far as the technical execution stuff, when it comes to like embedded system stuff, we're big fans of Microchip. They're always super supportive. They're very easy to work with. They've got lots of great documentation, and they've been gobbling up a lot of their competitors lately.
Yeah.
So their family of products like Atmel, everything Atmel is now Microchip, has been a real boon for us because now we've got all of that in our portfolio, and we know we're well supported because we're right down the street from their factory and their actual development engineers. So we can ask lots of questions.
Awesome.
Well, so following up on that, do you have, with all the projects that you've done over the years, a preferred microcontroller or microprocessor line that you guys really love to use? And if so,
Well,
why do you like that one?
Yeah, I've got a personal favorite, and I'll leave that to the end here. But the selection of microcontroller is really about the suitability for the application. Because most of our stuff is in the high end, it's not usually super cost sensitive. So we do tend to use the more capable and a little bit heavier powered processors because it reduces our development time. So we use a lot of the PIC32 MZ processors. We use a lot of DSPIC33 processors. But I'll tell you, my personal favorites are actually the smaller ones. I really like the PIC16. Those are 8-bit microcontrollers that have the core independent peripherals on them. I don't know if you guys have heard about these things, but they're really cool. They can do things like PID control, motor control, feedback loops. They've got these pretty powerful pulse width modulator controllers for switch mode power supplies up to doing like complicated multi-phase full bridges. And all of that capability exists in the hardware. So you can actually have, for instance, something that I personally designed, you can actually have like a switch mode power supply, high powered LED driver that has like 5 lines of code. And those 4 of those 5 lines are just configuring the hardware peripherals to do their thing. And then you've got a couple of lines of code just to set your brightness, for instance. And then the hardware just kind of operates it. Those are my favorite microprocessors, are those core independent peripheral 8-bit PIC16 microprocessors from Microchip.
Those PIC16s are fun. So I concur. But I guess I have a question for you. As you look forward a couple of years, my assessment's been the processing speed from a software firmware perspective has become so fast on microcontrollers that it's lessening the need sometimes for these peripheral register tiny compute chips that in the past had to be used for the extremely fast compute.
You know, that's a really good point, and it depends on a couple. Processors are becoming very capable and very fast, but that has 2 side effects. One is a lot of power consumption, and the other is cost. So you're not always in a situation where those make sense. So there's still a lot of good application for the very nimble, optimally designed, smaller embedded systems, even though you're right, a lot of times now it's like, oh, we need a little embedded system. Let's just throw a heavy ARM core processor or the guts of a Raspberry Pi. We use lots of Raspberry Pi compute modules for things where the unit cost and the power consumption don't matter, but it just keeps the development time so simple and so minimal. That's often the way to go in a lot of applications.
That makes sense to me.
So you talked a little bit about kind of, your personal preferences, and what about Marcus Engineering and like in terms of CAD tools, what do you recommend, and what do you generally use over there?
Yeah, so we are exclusively, when it comes to electronics CAD, we're exclusively an Altium Designer house. We will occasionally pick up projects from people that have been designed in KiCad or DipTrace or some of the other popular hobbyist tools.
For the layman as well, me being not a mechanical engineer, can
you
explain the difference, not an electrical engineer, can you explain the difference between the main tools that are out there for CAD tools?
Yeah, so Altium Designer is an all-in-one schematic capture. That means it helps you draw your schematics, it helps you define your bills of materials and your parts, and all-inclusive schematic capture and board layout tool. So in your general process of electronics design, you're picking out parts that will do the things you need to do. You are connecting them together in the form of a schematic. You do that in Altium Designer. And then you take all of those components and you try to lay them out on one of your nice big green circuit boards, although they come in all colors these days, but traditionally they've always been green. And that is called circuit board layout, PCB layout. And that's all done in Altium Designer. And some of these other tools like KiCad or DipTrace, and what's the other main hobbyist one? It's that AutoCAD has now. I keep forgetting its name.
Is it Eagle?
Yes, Eagle. That's the other big hobbyist one. They all do the same stuff. They don't scale as well. They're not as automated. They are missing some of the capabilities and tools, but they're cheap. They're dirt cheap. They range from free to hundreds of dollars. Whereas Altium is like $9,000 for a license and almost $2,000 a year to keep it up on maintenance. So it doesn't make sense for hobbyists, but for professionals, especially in small businesses, it's kind of the cream of the crop these days. There's also tools like OrCAD that larger companies use, but it's more of a legacy type product. AutoCAD is kind of Altium is the equivalent of SolidWorks for ECAD, whereas SolidWorks is what mechanical engineers use for 3D modeling and things. But that's our main tool. And then for embedded systems, we, again, because we're a microchip house, we're using MPLAB X IDE, their free development environment and their free C compilers, which are, pretty good and easy to use.
Awesome. Thank you for the in-depth description there. That helps a lot.
Let me jump
Daniel,
in quickly, Danny. On the topic of ECAD tools, Patrick, what's your perspective on auto routing? Are you one of those purists who won't touch it? Do you use it, but it tends to not do well, or do you think it's getting better with time?
Don't use it. It's crap. Would you like me to elaborate?
Nope. Don't.
Okay. Yeah, it's actually, in all seriousness, it doesn't work very well. It takes more work to set up the very specific rules to teach the tool how to auto route the way you want it to so that it's doing things correctly. It takes more work to do that than it does to just lay it out yourself. And that's for simple designs. Once you get to more complicated designs, it does an even worse job. And the benefit of just doing it yourself is even higher. It's just not there yet. The technology is just not there yet for auto routing.
Awesome. And it looks like we have some questions coming in from the audience here. So I'll pop this one up. So from Aaron, thanks Aaron for joining in. Marcus, could you talk a little bit about some specific projects you've worked on that you potentially can talk about?
Oh, I've got a perfect canned response for this.
Ones.
I've got a canned response for this. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. No,
Yeah.
a lot of our coolest projects are pretty sensitive, and I can't share very much about them. But let me pick a couple of select ones that I think you might find interesting, Aaron. So some of my favorites are in the medical device space. Obviously, medical devices are a pretty easy sell because not only are they making us money, but they're actually helping the world and doing good things. Whereas some of the military projects, I'll call that offsetting my good karma for the medical devices. But a couple of the coolest medical devices we've worked on over the years, one of them was to treat a MRSA. Daniel and Danny, do you guys know what MRSA is? So MRSA is one of those antibiotic-resistant bacteria that plagues hospitals and can cause some of these infections in immunocompromised patients or patients that have just come out of surgery, and you can't cure it. You can't stop it because it's resistant. And so MRSA has become a big problem in a lot of hospitals. And what this device does, let me back up one sec. MRSA also is one of those bacteria that actually colonizes up your nose. Isn't that weird? It like actually lives in your nostrils.
Wow.
So what this medical device does is it's actually a laser system that nurses can take to a patient's home, in fact, if they've tested positive for MRSA, so that they can be treated for the MRSA before they go into the hospital and potentially infect other patients before they like go into surgery or have some procedure done. And it's actually a little probe that goes up your nose, and it irradiates the inside of your nose with a couple of wavelengths of infrared light. And it doesn't actually kill the MRSA, but it changes the extracellular membrane of the MRSA, making it susceptible to traditional antibiotics again. So it facilitates the treatment. So that's one of my favorite projects to talk about. Another neat medical device that we're actually in the process of working on right now is a little forehead-mounted disposable wearable that measures EEG.
I like whereabout.
Little portable wearabout. It's a wearable
EEG.
that measures EEG, so the electrical signals of your brain, and it can actually monitor those over the course of a couple of hours and determine if you have delirium. So you usually don't think, oh, well, so-and-so has delirium. You can just tell because they're acting weird. Well, as it turns out, patients who are in hospitals and who are going into procedures or recently have had procedures, or maybe they're elderly, they have a high likelihood of having delirium, and it's not always very detectable. There's some behavioral tests you can do for delirium, but an electronic solution performs better. And what happens is if you're in the hospital and you've got delirium and you're not quite aware of what's going on, your healthcare outcomes are often worse because you're not in the right headspace. And so it can change the treatment path if they determine that you have delirium. There's some treatments for it. They can postpone surgeries and procedures. So we actually just released the first prototype of this delirium detector to our customer, and they're about to start clinical studies at Vanderbilt University this summer. So we're excited to see how it does because we're anxious to do the final design for it. So, Aaron, those are a couple of projects in the medical space that we've worked on that we found that I thought were pretty cool.
Awesome. Thank you for the question, and thank you for the answer, Marcus. Patrick, I apologize.
That's okay. I've got two first names.
I started reading the next question actually from Christina. Hello, Christina. It says, Patrick, Marcus, thanks for the session and great to meet you. What's your advice for IoT entrepreneurs? Okay, so we'll break a little bit into the business side here, specifically how to balance the tech specifics that can be a huge challenge in tandem with commercial product market fit.
You know, that is a great question, and that is something that plagues us as contract engineers too, because when you have technically aggressive product designs, and this certainly applies to the IoT space, when you've got technically aggressive product designs and you're trying to balance out the capabilities of the technology with the needs of the market, sometimes you're pushing yourself right up against the edge of a couple of things. development cost, unit cost, technical feasibility, size can be a fourth one, physical form factor, battery life can be an issue. And it actually turns into what we call a trade study, where we're actually looking at the needs of the market, trying to balance that with the technical capabilities, technical requirements, development budgets, development timeframes, and we actually have to iterate on it. It's a negotiation process. You have to sit the engineers down, preferably engineers with some marketing savvy, down with marketing people, preferably with some engineering savvy, and you have to negotiate it. And then you have to go back to the drawing board, both on the product market fit, see which features and capabilities are must-haves and are core to the product, and also consider which product features are nice-to-haves, or which ones the specifications perhaps you could relax a little bit. And then do that same thing on the technical side. And then you end up circulating towards what ostensibly would be an ideal solution. But I'll tell you what, we've had clients come into us with a marketing vision and a set of requirements, and we've told them, guys, we cannot meet your needs, and we do not think anybody can, because the combination of unit cost, technical capability, projected volumes, and the feature set you want to have just don't add up with today's technologies. And it's really important that you deal with this. Christina, I think it's wonderful that you're asking this question, because the worst mistake an IoT entrepreneur can make is to promote something that everybody wants to buy, and it's unique on the market, and it's 10 times better than anything anybody else has. And you get the investors on board and everybody's very excited about it. And then you realize the reason that you don't have a competitor for that exact product is because no one can make it. It can't exist. And that actually happens a lot. And people go way down the path of building their market, building their sales funnel, doing a lot of marketing and advertising. And then they hire their engineering team, and their engineering team either doesn't know or isn't willing to be honest about the difficulty. And then they're a year late, and then they're 2 years late, and nobody really understands why. And it's sometimes because it can't be done. And other times it's because everything was mismanaged. But that can always happen. But anyway, Thank you for the question, Christina. That was a great one.
Yeah, thank you as well, Christina. And she's asking about entrepreneurs, because if people don't know, Uberdots is a great platform for data analytics online. That's very, very manageable for entrepreneurs. So I guess
I'd like to ask another question about things that are hard.
Yeah. Okay.
And
it better not be a hard question.
It's an easy question about things that are hard.
Okay, I also want to add something after your question, Daniel.
All right. Well, and maybe there's not a answer to this, but I'm curious, if you take the business attributes out and you just look at the engineering associated with product development, is there a particular stage of the engineering that tends to be the hardest, the linchpin of any product development journey?
Absolutely. You know which part it is? This usually surprises people. The very beginning, the requirements. That is the hardest part. Nobody wants to write them. The engineers don't want to write them. The engineers don't want to read them. The customers don't want to write them. The customers don't want to discuss them. And you guys have been in engineering consulting before. How many times have you finished a project and said, "Oh man, we spent way too much time setting expectations and defining our requirements and making sure we knew what we wanted to accomplish"? How often have you spent too much time doing that? It's never happened. But you almost always finish a project going, "I wish we had thought about this before. I wish we'd thought about this earlier. Oh crap, this is going to be hard to fix now. I wish we had fixed it before." It's always the beginning of the project. It's always the requirements definition that needs the most TLC. It needs the most love and care. It needs the most energy put into it. And it's the part that we like the least. The business people, they want to get the project going. They want to start heading towards milestones. The technical people, they just want to start designing and building stuff. Engineers often want to take the requirements, say, "Oh, good, they're done," and they put them in a drawer. And now it's time to have fun and design stuff. But the reality is the requirements need to be front and center always. They need to be on a Post-it on your monitor, staring at you in the face through your whole project. So that's the hardest part of the project, is the beginning, the requirements. And if you do it badly, it can make the end of the project really, really hard, because you have to redo everything 3 times and you don't have any more budget or time to accomplish it. But it always comes back to the requirements having been done incorrectly.
So my follow-on question right there is I'd love to hear about some of your process for defining requirements. And then just to backtrack a little bit though, you mentioned last time that you see a lot of opportunities, or a lot of companies go through this hurdle of, hey, this is what we're trying to build. And they get started building it to realize, only later to realize that it was out of scope, bigger, more complex and more difficult. And then their timeline gets pushed back. Do you ever see the opposite, where they don't do enough market research and do too much engineering, and then their product doesn't have product market fit? Or have you not seen that?
And I'm just going to back up a little bit and give you guys a little bit more background. So one of my, I'll call my hobbies, is supporting entrepreneurial ecosystems and teaching entrepreneurship, especially around product and hardware companies, because that's my background. That's what I know best. But I do a lot of teaching and mentoring in entrepreneurship. I also help the state of Arizona administer a $3 million a year grant program that gives out $150,000 grants to early stage startup companies. So twice a year, I review about 20 business plans. Awesome. And they always fall into one of 3 categories. Okay. Well, one of 4 categories. We'll call it 4 categories. They have no idea what they're doing and have no business writing a business plan proposal. Okay. Category 2. And they can develop any product you want, and they have no business doing business, because they don't understand their market. They don't understand their market fit. They don't know where it's going to go. And they're just designing something. It's a 7-slice golden toaster. It's amazing. It's the latest technology, and nobody wants to buy it, except for maybe their mom. They might have asked their mom if it was a good idea. Okay. And then there's the third type of company. It's all business people who are pitching the. Of course, there's a product market fit. They're going to have tons of sales. Everybody wants it, and it can't be engineered. It just can't be done. And then there's the 4th type. This is the unicorn. They are the people who have the technical people on the team. They have the business people on the team. They're well balanced, and they've managed to negotiate the technical and the business and the product market fit to an optimal solution of feasibility, viability, and market need. And those are the ones we end up funding from the Arizona Commerce Authority Arizona Innovation Challenge Grant Program. Awesome. So yes, the short version of the TLDR, Danny, is yes, it's lacking of business acumen, but there's plenty of technical talent, or there's lacking of technical talent and plenty of business acumen. Neither case works very well.
Perfect. Well, I've got a question coming in from Katie Sawicki from Facebook. So pop that onto the screen here. And I think let's go ahead and do the official segue here into how to win with consultants, that white paper that you put together. I'd love to discuss that. But first off, do you have a go-to on how to format product requirements or how to write a good business plan for engineering projects?
So we actually do, Catherine. We've got a product requirements guide. It's kind of a who, what, why, and how of product requirement development. I don't think I have a link handy for that, but if anybody wants to yourself, Daniel or Danny, we can provide you with that documentation. And we've also got some guides on the right questions to ask for forming requirements, and some sample requirements documents that can help hardware entrepreneurs get on the right track with respect to their requirements definition process. And admittedly, it can be challenging if you've never done it before, but it is construct and write down on a piece of paper, not just talk about it, but write down a list of the things that you want your product to be able to do, regardless of whether it's the technical requirements, the regulatory requirements, or even the market requirements, how it needs to behave for the users and for the market as well. And what was the other part of the question? There was it was how to write business plans. I don't have any guidance on that, but there's tons of good guidance on the internet about how to write business plans. One of the things I would recommend to people is the lean canvas, lean startup approach. If you just Google lean canvas, lean startup, you'll find a lot of literature and documentation that can give you guidance on the 10 key pieces of information that investors and business, that you've got a well-rounded and balanced thought process with respect to your business.
Perfect. And we were, Patrick sent over this document, and so we were able to put a link here so you can check it out, or go to Marcus Engineering website.
So our Winning with Consultants guide is definitely something that considering using software, marketing applications, any legal projects. This information can be helpful. I'm going to go through a small amount of it on this discussion, but if you want the full comprehensive guide, and it's in PowerPoint format, it's fun, it's easy to go through, it's not a slog, you should definitely check it out.
Awesome. And we might have a slight internet issue right now with a little bit of cutouts, but we'll be able to make it work. So no problems. And thank you very much for sharing this. And yeah, so you can find it right here. Go ahead.
So in regards to winning with consultants, Patrick, I remember this was back in 2017, maybe even 2016. It was the first time we met at an event in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
I sat in one of your Winning with Consultants presentations, and you gave the magic number. It was the magic number in terms of dollars, or number of pages that you should write for product requirements relative to number of dollars that you're planning to spend. And it first surprised me. I was like, I don't want to write all these pages, but when I thought about it, it made a lot of prudent sense. So
that's jumping ahead in the discussion just a little bit, but I'll go ahead and address it because this is such an important way to calibrate yourself to the value of the effort that you're putting in. Okay, so let's talk about the importance of requirements. We have customers that come with $1 million projects, multi-million-dollar projects, and they want to have a half hour or a couple of hours of discussion and then issue a PO with a handful of line items on it. And the thought process that Daniel's talking about is, how many dollars is a page worth of work worth to you? Okay, nobody wants to write requirements. Let's face it. Who wants to write a report for school? Who wants to write a report in their job? Who wants to sit down and write 10 pages of anything? But other than that, it just kind of sucks. But the way to put it into perspective is, how many tens of thousands of dollars is a page of requirements worth? And so what we often tell entrepreneurs and customers that are working on larger projects, hundreds of thousands or $1 million, is say, you know what, isn't it worth at least a page of bullet points for $10,000? And so if you've got a $100,000 project, don't you think it's worth at least 10 pages? Isn't that a reasonable exchange of your time to write down a page for every $10,000 that you're going to give me to make sure that I give you $10,000 worth of value? Do you want to give me, Daniel, do you want to give me $100,000 to go off of a sentence of description and hope that you get what you want?
I mean, ideally, I'd like to just write down a sticky note, take a picture, and send it to you. But the point is well taken that my $100,000 might not be well spent then.
We would do our best. I assure you, we would do our best. In fact, that's one of the scary things about consulting firms and engineering firms and any kind of outsourcing is they'll take advantage of you. Not everyone is there for you. A lot of people are there to make their money. And it doesn't mean they're dishonest or they're trying to screw you. But if you give them a Post-it and $100,000, they'll do what's on the Post-it and they'll fill in the blanks. We won't take a project if we're not 100% positive that we're going to make good use of their money, because we have enough business that we only want happy clients. We don't want money and the possibility of an unhappy client.
Yeah.
But that's not the case for everyone. People are things are weird with COVID and stuff. And if you aren't on top of what you're doing, they'll happily take the handout from you, and you may get subpar outputs.
So
go ahead.
On that note, the question is like, what do you recommend to people, like when deciding whether or not to work with consultant or to hire internally? What are some of the variables that bake into that equation?
That's a good question. The real decision there is with respect to your business, what are your core competencies? Is your core competency the technology and the product development? If it is, it might make sense to have an internal team. If the core competency of the company is not necessarily the product, it could still be a product company, but the core competency may be the concept, the way you're marketing it, the way you're handling the sales, what you're doing with the data that you're gathering from the IoT device, and other things. The other major aspect of deciding whether or not to use consultants, use engineering services versus hiring your own team is this a one and done product? Are you going to be continuously developing products for the next 10 years? Or are you going to hire 3 engineers, have them work hard for a year, and then have to lay 2 of them off once things start ramping down and you release the product to market and there's nothing for them to work on? Generally, it's good to use engineering services and consultants if you don't perceive a long-term, constant revolving door of engineering projects for them to work on. The other thing to consider is when you build an engineering team, it's not just hiring an engineer. It's usually hiring a firmware engineer, an electrical engineer, someone who understands IoT and networking. And then you need an engineering manager to manage those people. Or maybe your CTO or your VP of engineering that you already have can manage that, but you still need an engineering manager. You need a bunch of software tools that you have to pay for every year, like Altium. You need project management tools. You also need process. You need to know how to develop projects. I tell you what, guys, it doesn't do you a lot of good to hire a very bright engineer that's not very good at documentation and process, because then you'll be completely dependent upon him. You won't have all the documentation that you need if something happens to him, or heaven forbid he quits. And you can be starting from close to square one with a new team of people trying to piece together what they actually designed, why they designed it, and what their specifications were for the product. So if you aren't product development experience, it can be very tricky to hire an engineer and keep an internal team unless you happen to know a golden boy engineer that you 100% trust and know they can do it, and they know that they can scale with your company and with the product and do a great job. If that's the case, terrific. But often outsourcing is a great way to go.
Thank
on
you.
the topic of outsourcing, one of the big ones that we often, back in the days of Breadware, had conversations with our customers was time and materials versus fixed bid. And so my question to you would be, time and materials versus fixed bid, what do the hirers, what do the IoT entrepreneurs need to know in order to decide what's the right approach for them?
That's another really good question. And this kind of comes down to some of the other aspects of doing well with consultants and some of the things that we've alluded to, which is requirements and development risk. As someone who has had a business that has done a lot of time and materials and a lot of fixed bid, the best thing for the entrepreneur, for the customer, is fixed bid and well-defined requirements and well-defined milestones. One of the worst things that I've ever, and it happens all the time, is they spent 30 grand, and then they spent another 20, and then they spent another 20, and it's 6 months late, and then they spent another 20, and it's time and materials, and they're just not getting anywhere. And finally, they give up. And then they come to us and they're like, Patrick, we just spent, what are the design outputs? And they're like, we just need to start over. We don't have anything to show for it. And that is always a result of poorly defined requirements, not having any milestones in place where there is some kind of deliverable or something that can be and quantifiably checked to say, hey, we got to X, you didn't deliver, we are done, and we're not paying you anymore until you deliver. And time and materials, you can still construct it well so you can meet those milestones and hold them accountable. But fixed bid makes it very easy. If you do fixed bid, the consultants, the services company, are motivated to be efficient and to get it delivered and to get it done, because the amount of money they make isn't going to change. When it's time and materials, if you haven't defined your requirements well and you keep changing your mind and keep making improvements, you just keep paying them more money and they're happy to take it. Generally speaking, for us, if we say it's going to be time and materials, that's usually a bad sign. That is a hint from us that you haven't defined your product very well, or it's complicated, or it's risky, and we're not willing to sign a specific amount of money because we don't know how much work it's going to be to accomplish what you want. So often, if a company's not willing to fix bid it, it's because they have uncertainty. And if they have uncertainty,
Sorry, I think it cut for 1 second there. But if they have uncertainty, what was the last?
Oh, if they have if you have uncertainty as the consultant, if the consultants and service providers have uncertainty, then you as the entrepreneur, as the customer, should also be uncertain about the arrangement and whether or not the consultants are confident in what they're doing.
And I think that this is a great point, and I strongly relate with this what you're talking about, especially my past history working at a product development consulting firm. I think that that's spot on. Like, if you're not able to fix bid it, that it conveys some level of uncertainty, and it's not often, especially when you get consultants and companies that need the work, right? It's hard for them to say, no, we're not the best fit. There's a better person. You should talk to this person, see if they're available. Good companies will do that if it's not in their core competency, or if it's out of the way. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So here's another little tip for people when they're in. And this relates to something that I consider to be mandatory for every entrepreneur, regardless of whether they're technical or not. Know your technology, know your product. I don't care if you don't have background in it. You need to become at least reasonably competent at what's going on. And the way you do that is by asking questions. You present your requirements, you present your product, you talk to each service provider, you talk to each consultant, and you say, what's hard about this? What's easy about this? What's missing from this? What would we stretch it? What technologies would you use? How would you design this? And make sure that they can do that. Make sure that they can, on the back of a napkin, kind of walk you through how it would be designed. Now, the first time you do this, you're not going to understand what they're talking about if you're novice in product development. But by the third consultant that you interview, you should start at least pattern matching terminology, approaches, architectures, and things. And by the time you get to the fifth or sixth that you're interviewing and talking to, you should start seeing some commonality in what's difficult, what's easy, how people are approaching things. Ask them about it and say, hey, well, I was talking to someone and they said they would do it with X, and you're talking about doing it with Y. Why is Y better? What are the advantages of that? Have a follow-up conversation with the other people you talk to and challenge them. Put the information that you're getting from each consultant that you're interviewing up to the test against the other consultants. Now, if they can't quickly architect things for you and kind of walk you through it, you may not be talking to a technical person at the company, which is fine. Ask to speak to a technical person and ask those questions. Also, if they're not indicating things that are easy, that are risky, that are challenging, and everything's just perfect, then ask them, what are you guys not good at? What are areas that you wouldn't be appropriate for? Another great question is, what's your sweet spot? What kind of product area is your sweet spot? What kind of product volumes are your sweet spot? And that's a good set of questions to ask before you tell them what you are and what kind of product you have, and make sure that what you're doing aligns with their capabilities. I'll be perfectly straight with our customers. We are good at low to medium volume stuff. We are good at highly regulated products. We are not great for throwaway consumer electronics things. One, we're kind of expensive for doing that stuff. We have a lot of process in place that has overhead associated with it. We have to charge more, but the value of our output is very, very high. If you're doing something that is not complex, if you're doing something that's a consumer product, it often makes sense to go to lower cost firms, to go overseas to get things designed. And also, we're not super at million unit per year volume. That requires a different kind of engineering. It requires a different kind of supply chain management and sourcing management. In those kind of situations, you're actually looking for Chinese parts with Chinese data sheets and have a likelihood of needing to travel to China to set up manufacturing. That's not really our space. And if a consultant isn't comfortable kind of telling you where they're good and where they're not, they're just good at everything, they're probably too hungry. They're probably not honest enough to tell you the truth when you need to hear the truth.
Great. Yeah, I completely agree. So I'd like to, if anyone would like to ask any further questions, please feel free to in the chats here. Daniel, do you have any follow-on questions to add?
Yeah, we're getting close to the end of the hour here. So I've got one more question. And then if there's any more questions that come in on the chat, we can hit those and then we can start to wind down.
Yeah.
But on the topic of prototyping, whether or not a company is working with a consultant, what are some strategies, Patrick, for keeping the costs low when a company has to build the first 1, 5, 10 prototype units and they don't want to shell out multiple thousands of dollars in manufacturing for that?
It's tricky, and it's heavily modulated by the competency of the entrepreneurial team. If you've got a technical, order circuit boards in China, build them yourself. That's always the way to go for early prototypes. If that's not possible, if you need someone else to build them, if you're not even really competent at doing any troubleshooting and testing, which is okay, then you need at least a garage shop hobbyist engineer to give you some support and help, if not actual engineering consulting business to do those things. It's very difficult to get things in low quantities for prototypes manufactured domestically with high assurance of quality if you don't have any knowledge of what any of that means yourself. And you are kind of stuck with paying a couple of $1,000s to get prototypes made a lot of the time. There are plenty of Chinese companies that will make circuit boards for you. They will assemble the boards for you and do the parts. They won't do any testing for you. If you don't know what you're doing, it can be a liability because they will do exactly what you say. And all the things you don't say, they will take the lowest cost path to get to what they think you wanted. And they're doing their best, and it might not be what you were expecting. And so you can spend $300 4 or 5 times and let a couple of months go by with that kind of approach if you don't know what you're getting into. So I'm an advocate of using Chinese manufacturing for early prototypes if you have some engineering support. I'm a big fan of building them yourself building them yourself and learning how to do light manufacturing and light assembly. Often it doesn't take more than some solder and a soldering iron to get early prototypes built up. And yes, you do have to learn it, but as entrepreneurs, that's our main job, is to learn things. And you learn and you learn and you learn until you know a lot, and then suddenly you're in business. So guys, if you don't mind, with respect to kind of the topic of how to win with consultants, I do want to just touch on a few key points that I'm not sure that we really summarized. Is that all right?
Definitely. Perfect. I'd love to hear
Floor
more.
is yours.
Yeah.
Okay. So with respect to winning with consultants, there are 4 main topic areas that I want everyone to think really hard about and make sure they're on top of. 1, know your tech. 2, think about your contracts and structure them well. Every relationship with a consultant should have a contract. 3, requirements. We talked a lot about requirements. Those are the most important thing. And 4, one that we didn't talk about, risk reduction. Make sure that when you're dealing with your consultants, that you are taking the highest risk things and tackling those first, and leave yourself an opportunity to bail out if the risky stuff doesn't work out. It's always a bummer to spend $100,000 and realize that your product's not going to work, when the reality is you could have spent $10,000 to prove or disprove that the complicated, risky part of the product could have been figured out right at the beginning. So again, know your tech. That means understand enough so that you can interview and vet consultants and talk to them and talk shop just a little bit. Contracts. Make sure you're setting milestones, that the arrangements are well understood, that the deliverables are well defined. Requirements. Tell them what you want to do. Tell them what you want them to do. Do it in writing. Part of the contract. And risk reduction. Make sure the development plan focuses on the hardest, scariest things first, so you can pull the plug if things aren't working out before you spend all the money on the easy stuff. So that's kind of the main topics that are expanded on tremendously in our How to Win with Consultants guide that you can download the PDF of.
And I'm going to put that right back up here for a second, right here. But also you can find it by contacting Marcus Engineering right on the site. And thank you so much. I really I feel like this is golden advice that you're handing out here.
Yeah, I hope everyone's ready to march off and hire a consultant now.
I wish
at the start of this hour.
I wish people would send me bags of gold to compensate me for the golden advice, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Herman and Wouter, for tuning in here. And we have a quick last question, and then we'll kind of wrap up. But from Wouter here, we have, Patrick, do you have fixed partners that you use / recommend for manufacturing your work, for the manufacturing of your work?
You know, it really depends on the project, Wouter. We do have partners that we use and use frequently, but it really depends on the situation. For instance, we've got different partners for medical devices than we do for aerospace manufacturing. We've got different partners for doing high volume stuff, even though I say we're not experts at high volume. When it does come up, we've got specific partners for that kind of stuff. We've got different partners for manufacturing of prototypes versus manufacturing of production. So it varies. We do have some preferred our customers too, but it really is tailored to the situation and tailored to the particular project rather than we always go to XYZ.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to pop this up here just because we're running out of time, but we do have a community forum where we have a channel for Patrick Marcus in this conversation. You can feel free to ask any additional questions directly here by jumping on. And like always, you can come to Ioterra to find experts like Patrick, as well as if you're looking for a job, an IoT engineering job. There's a lot of both services firms like Marcus Engineering and product companies that are looking for quality engineers. So thanks a bunch for the time, Patrick. And
yep, sure thing. And again, remember, outsourcing doesn't have to be scary. Hiring consultants doesn't have to be scary, but there are landmines. Make sure you are educating yourself and you're talking to lots of people and learning how not to step on any of those landmines. And we're always happy to help and advise people on how to get the best experiences and the best value out of consultants, whether they hire us or hire someone else. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thanks everyone for joining in. Really fun.
Bye-bye.